of get going. Now, one of the things that I sort of looked at, which was kind of funny, is Mr. X is at the end of the, well, I didn't listen to the exact end of it, but he's talking near the end. He's talking about how terrible this is. Somebody should fall on their sword. Somebody should rip up their security oath, and this is illegal, and we should have disclosure, whatever. And he's very upset about this whole thing. And then he's Mr. X, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, you're Mr. X, and you're calling for everybody to sort of, you know, violate their security clearances and go public with this thing. And that's why I say, like, a lot of this is I think is people wanting disclosure, but I think it may be more for just the fact that we need to know. And if you remember back to Jimmy Carter, President-elect Jimmy Carter tells the story through Danny Sheehan that Bush, when he got the briefing from former CIA Director Bush, when he became the president-elect, said curiosity is not sufficient need to know. And that is absolutely true, that it works basically like the military system. You salute, you do what you're told, you have a security clearance. If you step over the line, you lose your security clearance. And unless you're independently wealthy and you don't really care about this thing, basically what the story is here, the reason that you don't have disclosure is because all these people are trying to get more information. So if you're Eric Davis or Hal Puthoff or Jacques Vallée or any of these people, Kit Green, you're trying to figure out what's going on. And the last thing you need to do is dump your sources, because then people stop talking to you. And I know that for a fact because people stopped talking to me here many years ago. So I know how this works. So as soon as you open your mouth and start talking, you lose access to all the material. In fact, Richard Dolan talks about talking to one of these high-level people, and he said to him, "Can you tell me who the guys are who are running it?" And the guy says to him, he says, "Yeah, I could probably tell you, but if I told you, you'd go to the New York Times, I would have to deny it, and then nobody would ever talk to me again." And so that's basically the situation, that people aren't going to talk. So people didn't watch this video. They're probably not going to watch the video we're doing right now. All I want to do is sort of add on to some of the material that was discussed in there, because there's a couple little things that I think were sort of inaccurate. And I've got my little notes here, and I've got my little notes I made at McDonald's. So I'll just go through my notes, and anybody wants to jump in, everybody's muted. But first, let me talk to Nicole. Nikki, what do you think about the Trump thing? If you look back, people have said to me so many times, the president doesn't know. The president doesn't know anything. What do you think about Donald Trump basically saying last night that he knows, but he's not going to talk? Hang on.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, you're unmuted.
I think I've sprinkled across some social media today and even last night kind of my thoughts, but I'll reiterate a little bit. I didn't expect that we were going to get just an out there answer, even though he is the president that zings things out and probably doesn't think before he speaks. So that was kind of like an interest of mine. It's like, well, the possibilities are endless at this point. But I did find it interesting that he said Roswell, and he put it in his Trump way, but it was interesting that a sitting president said the word Roswell and the possibility that he would consider disclosure. So if there's nothing to disclose, why would you say I'll consider disclosing anything? I mean, we all talk about these runarounds with words and turns of phrases and these people admitting things without admitting things. So we all know he's a word master and a spin master. So we just have to take it for what it is. I want to count it as a win just for those points alone. A president said these words. Ta-da! We need one in the win column.
Anybody else want to unmute themselves and jump in on this? No. Okay. So it has been done before. Bill Clinton talked about Roswell. He said, he played both sides of the fence. He said, I'm embarrassed. I tried to find out, but I couldn't find out anything. I looked at the Roswell files, and there was no UFO crash at Roswell. So it's like he saw the files, but he couldn't get anything. So he played that game. And Bush, when he was on the Kimmel show, Bush Jr., he was asked, you know, did you go to the White House? And he said, oh, did you look at the UFO files? And he said, my daughters asked me the same question. And he said, what did you tell your daughters? And he said, nothing. He said, you're not going to tell us nothing? Nope, nothing. I'm not telling you nothing. And so he basically, again, sort of confirmed that the president, I think a lot of it is he may not know the details. They may tell him, stay out of the details. When we need to brief you, we'll brief you. But it's only going to, that's what they told Jim Semivan when he was in the CIA, when he had the experience with the beings in his room, and they told him, leave it alone, it'll ruin your career. And when he left the CIA, that's apparently when they actually briefed him. So in going back to the Wilson thing, there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out, and they showed the video clip of Edgar Mitchell at the very beginning, and I'd never noticed that until I saw them play and I've seen this clip numerous times, where he's arguing with Bill Nye, the science guy, who isn't actually a science guy. He's an engineer. He's got a bachelor's in engineering, and I ran buildings at University of Manitoba, and I know that science and engineering are not the same faculty. If you're an engineer, you're not a scientist. In fact, we used to chase around Dr. Eric Walker, who was an engineer, ran Penn State University, who said scientists can gather libraries full of material. It's not until an engineer comes along that something actually gets built that will help society. So engineers build things, and scientists are supposed to discover things, and Bill Nye is not a scientist, he's an engineer. One of the things I noticed that when they played this very early clip, Edgar Mitchell is arguing with him, is talking to him, and then he, of course, Nye starts to act stupid, but he basically identifies the fact that he went to Wilson, and that Wilson had called later on, and that he had said he couldn't get access. And then he says, and then later we got a full report. And I'd never heard that until now. The full report may have been 15 pages long by Eric Davis, because that's what they would have done, because Edgar Mitchell was a science advisor to NIDS. And when it's the same as you go to a conference party, you go to the dinner, you go whatever, drinking beer or whatever, and everybody sits around and chats. And don't you think the people at NIDS sat around at night and chatted about stuff? And so they would chat, and then this story would come out about Wilson, and they would say, well, let's see what we can get. And then they would go and investigate. And they had investigations on all sorts of things. And of course, then if he was the guy that mentioned, because otherwise, they wouldn't have known, Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff wouldn't have known about the Wilson story. They got it from Edgar Mitchell. So, of course, when they get the report as to what they discover about what actually happened when they interview Wilson, they give the report back to Mitchell. And Mitchell actually, I think, refers to it in that interview on CNN. He actually identifies the fact that he has a report, and it is the report that has come out that was written by Eric Davis. And again, going back to this thing about the security, Leslie Kane was working for them, and the other one you got to remember is Tom DeLonge. So a lot of this stuff, whatever you think of Stephen Greer about his personality and about what he's done, I've always maintained he's always told the truth. He's basically told the story that he did meet with Wilson, and he did have the meeting with the DIA guy. He had the interview with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and what you see is that Leslie Kane was with him, and her career took off because of it. She ended up with his New York Times bestseller book. And the other person whose career started, many people don't know, is Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge started with Stephen Greer, and then he went evil alien thing later on, but he was with Stephen Greer, and he actually flew Stephen Greer out to California, and Stephen Greer gave him a bunch of tapes from the disclosure witnesses. And that's, if you hear the early interviews with Tom DeLonge, he's talking about how his phone was being interrupted, and the government's after him, and he's hiding the tapes under the bed and all this kind of stuff. And then once he gets in with Lockheed Skunk Works in the skiff, then suddenly they want to be his friend, and they're sending him to all these people and set him up with all these different contacts. And the condition was that he sort of treat them like they're honorable guys working for the government and that sort of stuff. So there was that. What other things did they mention? I'm trying to think here. The other thing that they mentioned, I mentioned the fact that most of this stuff is in my Clinton book. I wrote, this is the 1997 period. This is Bill Clinton. And what you got to realize is that Wilson was told to shut up, otherwise he was going to get demoted. And you see that once he sort of gives up on it, Bill Clinton nominates him to be the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he actually did get promoted after that, and that's why you keep your mouth shut if you're in the military or in intelligence, because if you don't, your career is over. And unless you're independently wealthy, you don't want to do that. So all these guys are playing the game. I have empathy for these guys in situations they're in, that they're just trying to get more information, and I'll settle for whatever leaks out and slips out the side door and run with that. The other thing that is mentioned in here, and it's the same as the president, where people told me, oh, the president doesn't know, he's an idiot, and there's some evil cabal, down some dark alley who's running everything. And I always say, well, I think there's constitutional, they may want to keep it away from him. But the idea came up of MJ12. It's pretty heavily pushed in this thing. And in the session that Nicole and I did the other day, I mentioned the fact that the MJ12 thing, I had worked on this endlessly, and that Will Miller actually does an interview. He does an hour-and-a-half interview with Stephen Greer in 2013, which I'm pretty sure really put him in the doghouse. And in that interview, he tells all sorts of stories about who he set up for Stephen Greer, what these people's reactions were, these high-level guys that found out they didn't have access. And he talks about going to NORAD and the button at NORAD where they push the button and they've got a screen where all the UFOs come up, and just really, really wild stories. And Will Miller mentions in that interview, and it's indirectly mentioned in the Wilson document a couple of times, the whole thing about MJ12, that MJ12 is the real deal. And I've been saying this for many years. And actually, I have my book, Managing Magic, and in Managing Magic, I actually spent a number of pages, because I have all sorts of high-level people that we track back that basically said, yeah, MJ12 is real. Now, the document may be phony, it may be altered, but that doesn't change the fact that there was a group called MJ12. And Will Miller states that when he was leaving Wilson's office, that Wilson's assistant said to him, that MJ12 you guys are talking about, I just want to let you know that group does exist, and we here at the Joint Chiefs don't have a need to know for what they're doing. So it basically confirms that there is a control group which is responsible only to the President of the United States, and it's heavily controlled. And in the document, they talk a lot about how they were able to avoid the people who are sort of the gatekeepers. And in the document, I want to sort of point this out. In the document, they talk about how in the past it almost fell apart. There was a breach, and it almost came unsealed. That they found out what they were doing, and that I will absolutely maintain to you is when Area 51 happened. And I told this with Nicole the other day. The Senate Appropriations Committee, which is in charge of the money. So if you hear the interview that Mr. X does, he talks about the fact that the audit was an audit about money, and so this makes it point directly to Dick D'Amato. Now, Dick D'Amato was a high-level guy. In Jacques Vallée's book, there is a number of references to this Dick D'Amato guy, and Dick D'Amato he was a lawyer for the Senate Appropriations Committee. So when they're talking in this document about an audit, a money audit, that's what Dick D'Amato did. Because what happened was Senator Byrd, who was the head of the Senate Armed Appropriations Committee that hands out the money, when the Area 51 story was breaking, he basically said to his colleagues on the panel, he said, are we doing UFOs at Area 51? And nobody on the Appropriations Committee could answer the question. So he said, well, we're going to find out, because if they're doing UFOs at Area 51, we don't know, and we're the guys that are giving them the money. And so they send Dick D'Amato, and Dick D'Amato is a very, very powerful guy. He's a lawyer, and he basically goes out and he is able to waive any security clearance that anybody has. Doesn't matter which a security clearance is, he can waive it. So he goes in there, and he basically talks to George Knapp, talks to Huff, talks to Lear, talks to Bob Lazar. He actually gets on the base. He gets on Area 51. And basically, this is what they're talking about. This thing just about unravels, the whole thing. The Dick D'Amato has figured it out. Now, if you read Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science, Volume 4, he talks a lot about meetings that he had with Dick D'Amato. Now, Dick D'Amato really doesn't want to talk to anybody. There's one researcher I know who's talking to him, and Dick D'Amato is absolutely furious that he was able to find out that this was for real, that they had all this money, that they had they weren't being controlled. This is exactly what the document's saying. There's no oversight. The oversight people who are supposed to be watching him are looking the other way, and he was basically told to back off like everybody else. But then Dick D'Amato is very upset, like the researcher I know who's still talking to him, and he won't tell anything. He just wants to talk about how this isn't a democracy anymore, how these rogue guys have taken over. You got to wonder who's running the country. And that's because he discovered, and that's when, if you look back to Citizens Hearing, Jesse Marcel goes up, and Jesse Marcel tells the story of being taken into a room by Dick D'Amato. And he points to a book called Majestic. And only after reading Jacques Vallée's book do you realize why this came up. Because he's trying to figure out the Roswell thing, and he's trying to figure out the crash saucer thing. He interviews Whitley Strieber. And Whitley Strieber, of course, tells him about one of the MJ-12 people that was Senator Exxon, who was a relative of Whitley Strieber. And I guess he goes and he interviews Exxon, or he confirms that this was real. He's looking at all the MJ-12 stuff. And then that's when he's talking to Jesse Marcel Jr., and they're in this conference room in the sub-basement of the Capitol, and he taps on the book, and he says, "I just want to let you know, this is for real. This ain't fiction." And that's when Jesse says, "Yeah, I know, I knew that. So when are you going to tell the people?" And he said, "Well, if it was up to me, I would tell the people yesterday, but it's not up to me. I'm just here to find out how much the security is costing." So basically his hands were tied. He realized that there was this deep, and he said to Jesse, he said, "There's a dark section that is running this. They've got unlimited money and power, and they aren't elected, and they have control of everything." And that's basically what the document is showing. So Dick D'Amato was interviewed a number of times by Jacques Vallée in the 1990s. They were meeting together, and that's how this thing works. So Jacques Vallée was introduced to him by Whitley Strieber, and Whitley Strieber was interviewed. And you see all these people connecting up, and that's why he brought up Whitley Strieber's book, which was Majestic, which was about MJ-12 and Roswell. And that's where he said, this is for real, it's not fiction. So it's this inside club, and Jacques Vallée, if you look in his fourth book, he talks a lot about Dick D'Amato, and how Dick D'Amato is saying it works like a secret society, and he's furious about how these guys are they've got control of all this kind of stuff. So there's that. And then the other thing I was going to show on this document, there's about maybe 7 or 8 references to D'Amato, and maybe 7 or 8 pages of stuff on Dick D'Amato, who is a key figure that if you want to understand how this works, you got to realize that Dick D'Amato was in the middle of this thing. And the other thing I wanted to show is basically a correction with these guys on how my role in this thing. So I got the document in November of 2018 in Laughlin, Nevada. I think it was November 5th. And then I only saw it at that point. Then James Rigney, who had it, mailed it to me. I've actually talked to a reporter who's actually talking to the guy who actually got the documents, the original guy who got the documents. So I was given that. And when I saw the full document, that's when I sort of freaked out. And in this interview, it sort of says that I didn't have the confidence to do it. It had nothing to do with confidence. I got a lawyer in January of 2018. And the reason I got a lawyer is because I figured this was going to be kind of ugly. This is a major piece of work. There may be lawsuits or whatever, and they may try to back me off to stop doing stuff. So I had the lawyer, and I talked to James Ian Dolly. So they were talking about these guys maybe having leaked it, but they didn't. James talked to me in December, and at that point I said to him, he asked for a copy of the document. I said, no, I can't give you a copy of the document. And then I thought after, I said, well, you know what, that's pretty stupid. I'm not into cover up. I'm into disclosing. Like, why did I say that? And so, but he didn't talk to me again after that. And then that's what I started doing, is I started handing out the documents. Now, when I was with the lawyer, I signed what was called a disclosure trust. So what I did, and this is what I recommend other people do, you have a lot of private conversations that you have, and you sort of get sworn to secrecy by people about this and that, whatever. So what I did is I took all the documents that I had through my career and I put them into this disclosure trust of stuff that I've never talked about. And so the day that after I die, you need to be watching the internet because this stuff's all going to come out. And basically, if you see the rest of the documents, you'll know why I had to back off. And it basically comes down to, like, if Nicole says to me, tells me something before the interview, and then I go on the interview and I go, oh, I'm into disclosure. Guess what Nicole just told me? And we have that situation where you make these deals with people and you get stuck, and then that's what happened to me. I got stuck because some of these people in this document, I knew all these people, and so that's why I took time moving it. And then the thing about where it was disclosed, and I've mentioned this before, and I'll get into.
Will you hang on for just 1 second?
Yeah.
Because since you were on that topic and you gave your reason why just there and explained it very well, I've heard a lot of chatter online where people are thinking that you were threatened in this situation. No. Were you ever threatened, or did you feel threatened, or it was exactly what you just said, correct?
Yeah, no, I've said that numerous times. I hear a lot of people talking about, being threatened and the government's going to knock them off and they tried to kill them and all this kind of stuff. And I always tell them the same thing. I always say to them, I can only speak for myself. I've been at this for 45 years and I chased some people. Like, you see the high level people that I was chasing, all these people in this document. I mean, I was sort of around them and Ron Pandolfi and Kit Green and the President of the United States. And I went after, and I'm not even an American. So if they want to knock me off, they can knock me off legally. They don't even have to worry about the Constitution. And I have never been threatened, and I've never had anybody come to give me classified material in 45 years. So I wasn't threatened, but I was aware that Eric Davis is very sort of outspoken, and that there may be something. I wasn't worried about threats. I was worried about a lawsuit thing with the names, and if the document turned out not to be true or whatever. And that's why I had decided, I told Desta Barnaby, my assistant, that we would take out all the names and that would get rid of all the liability and stuff. And when I talked to Michael, I said, I talked about the lawsuit, and he said, oh, that could happen. I went, it could. Are you kidding me? I couldn't believe it. He said, yeah, that could happen. They could do it to back you off. And I'm going, holy shit. So I was like, sort of.
You hear about that being a power move, not just in ufology, but across the board. I mean, if you throw enough money into a situation to tie somebody up in court, then there you go. You're wasting years of somebody's life. So, and that might just be the end game, to waste the time. So smart move, Grant.
Yeah. So the way I did it was I said, like, I'm not into covering up, and that's the problem why nobody talks to me, is that I'm pretty open about what I've seen and what I've heard. And so then I said, after I refused the document to James, then I said, okay, I'm going to, anybody wants to, I'll talk about the document all the time. So I would talk to people, I'd say, get this really weird document. And they'd say, what's it say? And I go, I'll tell them. And then they'd say, can I get a copy? And I go, oh, you want a copy? Okay. And I was waiting for someone to drop the document. And so I talked to this guy. He was a pretty high level guy, who said, I'm not under a non-disclosure agreement at the moment. As soon as I'm under a non-disclosure agreement, I can't talk to you anymore. And he wanted my advice on some high-level people in ufology that were sort of offering him jobs and stuff like that. And I was sort of giving him the insight, what would you do if you were in my position and stuff like that. So I was talking to this guy, and he had a friend inside the Pentagon. This is the people that I believe that dropped the document. So, and this guy inside the Pentagon actually apparently knew Lou Elizondo and was telling these stories about Lou Elizondo. But anyway, so he was talking to me, and so he said, I told him about the document, and then he said, oh, can I see it? So I give it to him, and then he goes, well, why don't you drop it? And I said, well, and I explained, and you'll see when the disclosure trust is released why I had so much hesitation to drop it. And I said, well, this and that, and I explained it, and he said, oh. And then he next day he was talking to me, he said, oh, my friend in the Pentagon says, just put it on Reddit. It's real easy. Just put it on Reddit. And I said, but I don't want to be the guy to drop the document. And then he said, okay, leave it with me. And then it was about maybe 3 months later that maybe 3 months or 2 months, whatever. It was a little bit later. He phones me up from Chicago. He's actually near you, Nicole, in Chicago. He's in an elevator in Chicago. He phones me up and he said, that document you gave me? And I said, yeah. I think it just went on the internet. I went, oh, okay. So then I'm sort of panicking, I'm like, what the hell's going to happen here? And the shit's going to hit the fan. And then the first people to pick it up was the young guns, the guys that I called the young guns. So James phones me up and he says, oh, Danny Silva's got this document. And it just came on the internet. And it sounds like the document you were talking to me about in December. And I go, and my heart rate's just going. I'm going, really? So how many pages is it? He goes, it's 15. I go, yeah, it sounds like the document. And I'm going, holy shoot, it's out. They've got it. So then he says, and then I'm talking, and I said, well, tell Danny, I said, if you drop it, you'll be the most famous guy in the world, but nobody will ever talk to you again. And Danny didn't drop it either. So Danny had I don't know how much sooner. And what I did, because we were trying to get it out, but indirectly, so then I actually went back to James Rigney, and Desta will confirm this. We had a number of conversations with James Rigney, because he actually said to me, he said, well, what are you doing? What are you doing with it? And I said, well, I got these problems. And I said, you're actually the guy who should drop it, because I know these guys. You don't know these guys. Like if it was a document by, Ron Pandolfi, I would have dropped it in 30 seconds. I mean, I couldn't care less because I really don't know them. I mean, but if you know the people, it's a different story. So I said, you don't know these guys. They don't know you. I mean, it's not going to affect you. You can drop the document. You just found the document. You were given the document or whatever. You don't have any sort of axe to grind in this thing. And we couldn't convince him to give. And then finally he gave it. He gave it to James Fox. And I said, well, James Fox ain't going to do anything with this document. He's a TV guy. I mean, it takes years for him to do anything. And I can't remember who else. I think he eventually sent it to Dolan, but I think Dolan had it by then. But what happened was Jimmy Church, he sent a copy to Jimmy Church, and I think he sent a copy to Dolan, but they wouldn't open it because it was an attachment, and they thought it might have been a virus, so they wouldn't open the document. So you had all these things. So this thing sat on the internet for a couple of months until the Young Guns picked it up, and then they sort of made it go viral. And then I'll give Richard Dolan, because he knew the people the same as me. He knew all these people. But if you know the backstory to Richard actually went on camera. He went on Jimmy Church's show the month after I got the document. And so this is maybe 5 or 6 months before he actually got the document and went public with it. He's on the Jimmy Church show. And that's when James Rigney phones me up and says, did you give the document to Dolan? I go, no, I didn't give it to him. And he said, he's talking about it. He's on Jimmy Church talking about it. And I go, no, he's not talking about it. He said, yeah, he's on. And I said, I didn't give him the document. And then he said, but he's talking about it. And I said, he is? So I go on Jimmy Church and I listen. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes in, December 19th, I think, of 2018. And I go there and I listen 2 hours and 15 minutes in, and sure enough, he's talking about the document. And I'm going, what is going on here? Like, this is crazy. He's talking about this document. So when he got the document, the 15 pages, and I think he's sort of said this, he doesn't say who it is, but he went back to the guy who showed him the document in 2007. And that's the whole deal. That's why I wrote it up in my book on the Clinton book, is because in 2007 or 2008, Richard had been shown 2 pages of the document. And that's why he went after Wilson. He went after Wilson first, and he sort of ambushed him with an interview. And Wilson made his first denial and said it was all poppycock, and told Richard, no, this is all nonsense or whatever. So that's why Richard went. But Richard was public and talked about this document in December, 6 months before it went public. He hadn't seen the document, the whole document. He'd only seen 2 pages. But he was talking about, Jimmy Church asked him, is there ever a document that you've seen that you can't talk about, and you wish you'd had it or whatever? And he started describing this document. Now that deals with that. Let me see what else I want to deal with here. Anybody's got a question, just throw it in here. Go look at my notes here. They talk about Perry, Secretary Perry, in this whole thing. And Perry was involved. Wilson was going to him. He also is famous for doing the whole thing where the Secretary of Defense is under Cohen, and these guys were all trying to get UFO stuff as well. They knew they were locked out. They were trying to get the tape of the UFO that had landed at Edwards Air Force Base. And so that covers that. The young gun thing, somebody said I gave it to the young guns that they did, but no, they were the first to discover it. So they were the first to pick it off of Reddit and started moving it around. But it still didn't really move even after they got it, because they weren't basically putting it out there. It wasn't until Richard did it that it sort of took off. The TTSA thing, they're talking about how they've all not, all of them put off. Davis, uh, Semivan, and Kit Green have all, none of them have denied the document, which is significant that they pointed out, Mr. X pointed out, which is very true. If this thing was a fake,
so I'm just going to wing it.
Okay, we are recording. So welcome back. We had a problem with the Zoom broadcast. I won't get into what happened. We have a bunch of accounts. We opened the wrong account and we got cut off after 40 minutes. So I'm back with Nikki Sakich, and we're going to go through part 2 for the second time. We actually went through it once and we forgot to record. So hopefully we get it right tonight. So how are you doing, Nikki?
I'm doing well. Take 2.
Take 2. Well, at least we know what this is. And a bunch of stuff has actually happened since we did part 2. We have the Joe, UFO Joe did his thing. What do you think of it?
Go. 4 parts.
4
Read
parts.
them all. Get comfortable. It's a long one.
It's a long one. And he's talking about the same thing we're going to talk about tonight, the Wilson document.
Yes. Excellent.
Did you see anything in his that was sort of new to you?
No, he just lays it out very, very detailed and nicely for everybody. So, I mean, I know there was probably some things that he highlighted that we just didn't even discuss, but you know, you and I have been discussing this for forever now.
Yeah. And we do have the situation where we've gone through it, and I pointed out the one mistake I made because I'd read the document that I realized that Miller hadn't set up the meeting with Davis. But I learned a few things from Joe's. I'll sort of mention some of that and sort of highlight. And all I want to do is basically for myself highlight some of the stuff that my involvement in this, and because I've been working on this for probably since the 1980s, and a lot of these people are involved, and some of the stuff that I've seen over the years that sort of links into what this is. So I've got this all on a Word document, which you have. I sent it to you. So let me take over the screen here, and I will basically, I'll share the screen, and we'll go to share. Okay. So you can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This has to do with what I think people are going to have to do here is they're going to have to eat some crow on this whole thing. That basically I've said all along, Stephen Greer was right about everything he said. I mean, he may not be the easiest guy to get along with, and he may have a big ego or whatever, but Stephen Greer was right about everything. I remember I did the whole thing with the story with him and Wosley, where he went to brief Wosley and everybody said no, he didn't. Wosley denied it, and then John Peterson, who was involved in that whole Wosley thing, he denied it. The wives denied it, and then they got caught again. Peterson and Wosley got caught again with, I think, sort of go and say, I'm sorry, we got it wrong. So those documents are there, and this is the document that Stephen Greer showed to the Admiral when he suddenly realized that he was out of the loop on what was going on, that some of this stuff he should know about. And I believe that document is in the Stephen Greer files at the Presidential Library. So that's just to mention this whole sort of a background on what happened. So he shows this document to the Admiral. The Admiral finds out that he's been had, and he starts this investigation. And I didn't realize until Joe's paper that he actually left Washington. I thought he was just making phone calls. He actually flies somewhere to go and have an encounter, and he actually gets in contact with the group that is running it, and that's always believed to be Lockheed Skunk Works. He may have gone to Area 51 because that's apparently where Tom DeLonge was in the skiff there. So you see that he did this investigation. But the other thing I wanted to mention, and I'm just clearing up stuff from the first session that we did. One of the presentations that was done, and there's been a couple of them, just Mr. X one, and then there's Joe, UFO Joe's long 4-part series that's on the internet that go through this. And I think it was the Mr. X that talked about me going to Oak Shannon. And I want to clear that up. I never went to Oak Shannon. What I will clear up about Oak Shannon is that I knew who Oak Shannon was in 2018. So a lot of people have sort of got really religious about all this stuff, and they're starting to learn who all these people were. And I've always said, these people have been around a long time. I've known about these people. Oak Shannon was involved in the Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group that was run by John Alexander in 1985. I knew who he was because I've got his notes, and I will be releasing those notes in a little while in a book called Alien Documents. It's 26 pages, and I'll also be releasing the 2 documents that are at question here, the Wilson document and the alien autopsy document. And I'm also going to release documents from an eyes-only study for a draft of a manuscript that was being done about an eyes-only study for President Lyndon Johnson. So I did not talk to Oak Shannon, but I did know who Oak Shannon was. That was why when I saw the couple pages that I saw in Laughlin, Nevada in 2018, I saw Oak Shannon's name, and I saw Eric Davis's name, and I knew that they were very close, and I knew that I had Oak Shannon's notes, and that he was heavily involved in the UFO thing, and that's what got me so interested. So what I did, just to give you the fact that I do have those notes, this has been referenced in some of the studies that people are talking about this document. So Oak Shannon was a part, and this is from the first page of Oak Shannon's notes. And what I basically did, because it's got a security classification on it, what I did is I stuck this in a lecture at Eureka Springs, and you've been to that conference. This is going back probably at least a dozen years. I put it, and I showed this part of the screen, and all it does is basically show the date of the meeting, the secure facility, which is in Virginia, and that the fact that it was called the Advanced Theoretical Physics Conference, because before then, the New York Times had done a book, and it was called the UFO Working Group. And it was when I put this out on the screen in Eureka Springs that Tim Good, who was the sort of the foremost researcher at that time, came to me and said, oh, you put that thing on the screen there. Can I get the names? So what I'd done for about 1 second, I put the names of the 20 people that were in that group. And these were all, this is organized by, I believe, Kit Green and by John Alexander. They bring in these 20 guys who have top secret SCI clearances, and they're trying to figure out, they're trying to get funding, almost like To the Stars. They're trying to get funding for UFOs, and they're gathering together. They're trying to figure out, what do we know about this stuff? And basically, they didn't know anything. It was all brick walls, exactly what John Alexander has said. They couldn't get anything. They realized somebody was doing something, but they couldn't figure out what it was. And they figured because we couldn't get it, well, then nobody else. They're starting to have doubts that this sort of actually this high-level thing existed. But they did meet there for a number of days, and I have the notes. So I put them up, and then what happened was, because Timothy Good, the major researcher, had found out, I guess he told Hal Puthoff, and then Hal Puthoff came to me and asked, could he see the note? He said, you have these names of a group that I was supposedly part of. Can I see the names? And I said, sure. And I gave him the names, and I never heard anything back. So that confirmed that what I had was real. So I will be releasing those, and that's why Oak Shannon is such a key figure. Now, the mistake I made in the first go around was I had not read the document. I've never read the document except for the last page and the Will Miller letter I read, and the first page when I was showing it in Laughlin. In fact, when I first saw it, I only thought there was 2 pages. It was when I saw there's 15 pages, that's when I started to freak out. I thought it was like a 2-page document. And so the meeting was actually set up supposedly by this Ryan guy, and it was the Association of Former Intelligence Officers. Now, this is a key part, and I don't know if the other guys have really brought this up, but this is a key thing. Richard Doty, and you've talked to Richard Doty. Richard Doty talks about this.
Yeah.
So you have former intelligence officers, and they get together whenever, once a year, twice a year. They have these meetings. And of course, if you are an intelligence officer and you run up against Richard Doty, what are you going to ask him about? Hey, Richard, I mean, what's the deal with UFOs? What's the latest deal? Have you heard anything new? And so that's where people start to talk, and they can trust each other because they're all intelligence officers or whatever. And it's almost like a secret society. These guys are making deals. So this Ryan guy was part of this thing, and that's where Eric made, I guess, the contact. And that's the way I'm understanding. I may still be wrong, but that's where I'm making the contact, because I know Eric came to me at one point, and he asked for a phone number, Eric Davis. And he asked for a phone number, and it was a very high level person. And I said, no, I haven't got the phone number. I'm not even an American. How would I have that phone number? And I said, well, why do you want that guy's phone number? And then he said, well, I phoned these other 2 guys that are related to the third guy. And I said, you talked to those guys? And he went, yeah, I talked to them. And because they were members of the former members of the Association for Former Intelligence Officers, the third guy who was looking for the phone number for was not a member. So he didn't have any contact, and he was trying to get a contact to talk to the third guy. So that's how they go through this. They make contacts. They can make interactions with people who are in the intelligence community through this Association of Former Intelligence Officers. And you'll hear that John Alexander was a founding member of the group that's in Las Vegas. And, they bring in speakers like, I think, John Lear spoke there. So that's how this meeting came down, where it was set up, and the thing went back to the Admiral, and the Admiral agreed to do this interview. But it was basically, I'll contend, it was set up for Bob Bigelow. That it was written by Eric Davis for Bob Bigelow. And there's, if you remember, UFO Joe has that conversation with George Knapp, or George Knapp talks about it. And George Knapp makes a very important point, is that Eric Davis would deny this. If this was not true, he would have denied it. And also the fact that Eric Davis would not have made something up and tried to sell it off to Bob Bigelow. He's working for Bob Bigelow. He's not going to put in a bunch of junk into a document and give it to Bob Bigelow, because he's working for Bob Bigelow. And I'd never thought about that until he brought that up.
I didn't think about that either. Now that you bring it up, or now that Joe brought it up, actually, I did think that was brilliant. I don't know anybody who purposefully lies to their boss and gets away with it.
Yeah, especially if you've talked to people, and I did talk to Eric about what it was like to work there, and I talked to a few people who work for Bigelow, and Bigelow didn't suffer fools. I mean, he was very, very tough to work for. I talked to Linda about her interaction working for Bigelow, and he didn't fool around. So that's kind of the last guy you're going to want to lie to. Now, the UFO Joe, I mentioned this. There's one thing his thing was very good, very detailed. I'm gonna have to read it a few more times, because he actually goes through the actual the dates going back as to who, with Leslie Kane and when the articles are written. But he talked about this thing, and I have a little bit of a disagreement with this. And this is based upon my dealing with the Avery for many, many years, these guys. Of how I think it works. I think it works more like a secret society. So he says Mr. Davis can legally talk about what happened in 2002 in Las Vegas and face no legal repercussions. But he chooses not to, because he promised Admiral Wilson and gave his word. That's sort of it, but that's not it. I think what it is it's this secret society thing that, if you read the notes, the Admiral checks Eric Davis's background. And it comes down because Oak Shannon says this is a good guy, you can trust this guy, and it all comes down to trust. So what they're doing is they're all trying to figure out the answer. So they're talking to people, and it's always this trust deal. I'm not going to rat you out. I'm not going to talk, and give me what you've got. And so you make these little backdoor deals. And that was what I mentioned, I think, in part one, was that Richard Doty and Richard Dolan brought this up, that if you talk to one of the high level people and you say, can you name who the people are running it? And they say, yeah, I can. But if I tell you, you're going to go to New York Times, they'll deny it. And then I lose access. I have to deny it. And then I'll lose access to anybody talking to me. So the whole deal of this whole thing is you got to keep it secret, because if you don't keep it secret, nobody will ever talk to you again. They completely cut you off. And that's how you make your deals. That's how you figure out what's going on. And you got to realize that's the bottom line to these guys. They're trying to figure out how this thing works, and you're not going to burn your bridges, because that's all you've got is your ability to keep quiet and to make deals with people to give you stuff that they probably shouldn't be giving you. And the minute you rat on somebody, it's game over. Nobody will talk to you again.
Right. And we want them to keep talking.
Yeah.
That's the point.
That's even the thing.
We all want the same thing. We're just doing it in different ways.
Sure. That's even like now there's this, there's a story that the New York Times may be working on an article, and they're saying, be quiet, don't say it. And they're playing the same game. It's like, don't talk, because, all our, it's all going to fall apart. And so even they're playing this sort of the secrecy game, that they need this secrecy until the end. And you don't want the story to all blow up, so you want to tie all the knots and all the bows and stuff and get it all settled. So that's basically, it's this trust issue. Now, when you talk in New York Times, you're talking Leslie Kane and Blumenthal, who worked on the first article. And it's actually Leslie Kane and Stephen Greer who actually sort of out the general a long time ago, and he gets very upset. So he's very hesitant. Before Richard Dolan comes there, they sort of out him. And it's the same thing. He shouldn't have talked. He talked to Miller. Miller goes to Leslie Kane. Leslie Kane puts this article out, and suddenly he's exposed, and suddenly everybody's giving him a hard time, and then nobody's going to talk to him. He loses his credibility because he can't keep his mouth shut. So Leslie was part of this. And what people got to realize, I don't think people realize, is that Leslie used to work with Stephen Greer. And what you see, if you actually take a look at the generals, pilots, and government officials, go on the record, and you take a look at all the people that she's got in there, it's basically Stephen Greer's disclosure witnesses. So she worked with him, and then she broke off. And while she was with him, she had a lot of conversations with Will Miller, who was Stephen Greer's military advisor. So she talks to him, and in her book, and UFO Joe brings this out, in her book, she actually talks about the contact with Miller, and you can see this page here. She's talking about him, and where he says that he believes that there's no threat to the UFO thing, and he's basically telling her about people with personal knowledge would seek me out because they knew I had an interest, and I've done for a long time. So he had a long time interest in the whole thing, and she starts to talk to him. And she goes and she writes an article for the Boston Globe. And that's when sort of Admiral Miller starts getting exposed. And Stephen Greer is talking about it. And so is Sherry Adamak, who was Stephen Greer's sort of right-hand assistant. She first talks about it in 1997 when the briefing takes place. And she mentions the fact that they had given this briefing in the Pentagon. But Miller was, like Stephen Greer said, only a small fraction have demonstrated even a remote resemblance of hostility. And that was only with severe provocation, usually an attack by a military aircraft. So she's talking to him, and she even says here, he retired from the U.S. Navy, began to take steps to set up a series of information briefings that culminated in a meeting in 1997 with Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson. So he gets out and he's very hesitant. And then, as I mentioned in part one, and this is something that people always forget as well, is that Richard Dolan was shown 2 pages of the document that talk about Wilson. And so he gets involved in 98 to go and talk to Wilson. So Wilson has people coming to him, and he's denying it, because it's the old deal, is if you talk, basically that's the end of your job potentially, and your security clearances. And if you don't have a security clearance, you have a job. So they're going to deny all this kind of stuff. So and Wilson does get promoted to Defense Intelligence Agency after the whole thing. He sort of keeps quiet, and he does get promoted by Bill Clinton to the Director of Defense Intelligence Agency. And this is again from from Kane's book, where she's talking about he provided me with a, she's talking about Admiral Wilson here. Miller has provided me with a confidential, detailed account of these meetings. She's talking about the Wilson meeting and those leading up to them, including attendees, preparatory briefings, topics discussed, and reactions from the attendees. So he sort of tells her everything, and she starts to go public with it, and it starts to sort of unravel. And so she's talking here, Leslie Kane is talking, I asked Miller to elaborate further on who is keeping whom in the dark. And so Miller talks, and so this is where Stephen Greer gets all this kind of stuff, and you can see that Admiral Wilson has the same thing. The control group cannot allow any information on their closely held UFO research to be accessed by anybody outside those specially cleared for that unacknowledged special access program. Neither Joint Chiefs of Staff nor the director of DIA himself would get any information on the subject. This is fact. Yet I know that sources within multiple organizations maintain such information. Leadership remains protected from such knowledge. As I am concerned, the question is answered. So it's the old idea that if they don't tell them, then if they get called in front of Congress, they can go up there and say, I don't know what's going on. So only if you are working on the program, you need to know. So this has all been spelled out by Admiral Miller to Leslie Kane and to Stephen Greer, and Wilson knows this, so he's doing the same thing, and he finds out he's cut out. Now let's go to the next little bit here. This is kind of interesting. This has to do with this potentially New York Times article coming up. As you may know, I said the first New York Times article was coming, and I have had some indirect contacts with Ron Pandolfi. So when the first New York Times article broke, I immediately was talking to Dan Smith that day when it broke, and I said, okay, so what does Ron say? So then he gives me back the information. Ron called to say that the allegations of a Nimitz encounter are a scam, engineered by Hell, put off in cahoots with his old friend Leslie Kane. The two articles would never have made it past the editors in the old days, but now the New York Times is desperate for readership, along with all the other outlets. And you can see now Ron Pandolfi is actually involved now in this latest version. He's actually sort of making fun of Eric Davis and saying, okay, so who believes that Eric Davis lied? How many are loons, crooks, or worse? Or are these people all the same? All three. So he sticks his nose in there, and he is doing whatever he's doing. This was when the first one came up, people said, oh, it's not going to happen, you're never going to get to the bottom of this thing, and I just saw this, and I thought it'd be kind of interesting to bring out, because I don't think I brought it up in a lecture for quite a while. When the first New York Times article was going to come out, everybody said it was all garbage, this is not going to happen, it's all a scam, Tom DeLonge is scamming people. And so this is December 2nd. The New York Times article breaks on the 16th. So on the 2nd, this Jamie Smith guy says, this is the countdown to announce another countdown of a coming countdown for another countdown we're really waiting for, but that countdown hasn't started until this countdown finishes before the other one. So they're basically saying, because they kept, DeLonge kept saying, oh, it's coming, it's going to come. And then it was like, oh, it's coming, it's coming. And people were giving him a real hard time. You see December 2nd here, he's getting this real hard time. And somebody said, he said at one point it was 3 weeks. And he said, I was just going to ask if it's been 3 weeks yet. And you keep saying that and nothing ever happens. And then I've been staying tuned since 2015. DeLonge had said, staying tuned. And he said, I've been staying tuned since 2015. So he took a lot of flack, and you can even see George Knapp gets into this. And just before it happens, you can see December 13th. This is 3 days before it happens. Even Tom DeLonge looks like he doesn't believe it's going to happen. He said, something's coming. And every day they tell me, one more day, ugh. But I will look back at it as one of my greatest achievements, lifetime achievements.
And he's just using the wrong words. He needed to say, it's coming, have patience, have fortitude. This could take decades, like.
but they kept telling him it was coming. So he had the news conference on October the 11th, and he said we got these films and this thing's going to come. And then he kept saying it. So every week he'd say it's coming, and it just dragged on until the middle of December. And then when it came, then it finally came. But I'm just trying to show the people that he took a lot of flack. Even he's saying stay very tuned. And then George Knapp gets involved. Remember the October announcement made by rocker Tom DeLonge and his team of former insiders? Stay tuned. And then Tom DeLonge says, yeah, stay tuned. And that's December 10th. They're trying to keep people on the hook. They're trying to keep people interested. Yeah. And people are saying this is a scam. This guy's got nothing. Nothing's going to happen. And of course, then it does break. So now we're hearing the same story, and we'll see. There's a number of articles. There's New York Post, New York Times, and one other major reporter who talked to me who firmly believes the document's real. I'm not sure what he's going to do with it, but he was asking me, went through everything and asked me who to talk to, and I suggested somebody we're going to talk to about it in a second, and he'd already gone down that road. So he knows the background, he knows who the players are. This is just a document I just threw in here just for a lot of people are still, figuring that no, it didn't come from Mitchell's files. And here's the one where I actually send that shows people how this actually works. So I actually put this one. I was given 4 documents. I was given the Wilson leak document. I was given the alien autopsy document, and I was given this document, which is a letter from Bob Bigelow to Edgar Mitchell in 1996, and I was given a 4th document, which has not been released, which is really not a UFO, and we probably won't release it. It's just a short letter of somebody dies, and he's condolences to the wife of a very famous person. So it really has nothing to do with it. So we probably won't release that. But so this one, and the reason I released it is you have to realize what was going on here. The whole Eric Davis thing is just a report to Bob Bigelow. And Bob Bigelow's the guy with the money. Bob Bigelow's the guy that's calling all these people in. And you can see he's inviting Edgar Mitchell to a meeting in 1996. And they actually have 6 meetings a year. And then I think they cut him down to 4, then to 3, then they shut the whole thing down. But he was bringing these people in, and he's basically sort of spelling out to him, we're bringing in all these near-death experience guys, because that was what Bigelow wanted. He was going to study life after death, and he was going to study UFOs. So a lot of the speakers that were coming in were life after death speakers, and he's inviting them to this whole thing. So that's what they would do. They work on certain projects, and one of the projects they had was the alien autopsy, and the other project that they sort of wanted to answer was the Holloman-Air-Force-based film, and the one that Eric Davis, I assume, is just a report that they wanted to get to the bottom of what happened in 1997 in the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and what actually happened. Did this guy actually track this stuff down? And Eric Davis is sent there to run the investigation, and he sets up through this Ryan guy, makes the contact, has the meeting, and writes the report to Bob Bigelow. And probably everybody that was there realized what was going on, because they all were working on these various projects. So that's basically how it happens. So this is a letter from Bigelow. Now, this is part of the thing that I think I've got that I think people should maybe pay attention to, because I haven't heard anybody talk about this yet. In the document, you see that they talk about a audit. You remember that? They're talking about an audit. And it's very definite that the audit is a money audit. And so I know this whole story. It was told to me, and I had a lot of inside stories on this, and I know people who are even now still sort of trying to talk to Dick D'Amato. Dick D'Amato was a key guy who worked for the Senate Appropriations Committee. So this is I'm just guessing, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. This is the audit that they're talking about. So what they say, Wilson is talking about this fear of, or the contractors are afraid that Wilson's going to get in there and he's going to upset the apple cart, and he's going to expose the program, and it's all going to be thrown out there, and it's going to get shut down. And they say once before, the whole program just about got exposed by a money audit. Now the money audit was done by Dick D'Amato. I can almost guarantee that. It was done in 1990, 1991. And that was because the Area 51 story was breaking. So what happens is, and Stephen Greer even talks about this in his book as well, that he went to brief this Senate Appropriations Chairman Byrd. And Byrd was interested in UFOs. Stephen Greer had got him all wound up about this. And Area 51 was happening, and there was all these stories that we had flying saucers at Area 51, and they're doing this back engineering. And the Appropriation Committee was the ones that hand out the money. So here's Greer talking about it. He said, I was asked to go to a meeting at the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the chief counsel for the committee at that time was a guy by the name of Dick chief counsel was a guy by the name of Dick D'Amato. No relationship to Senator D'Amato. He worked with Senator Byrd of West Virginia, who is the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. D'Amato had a top secret clearance and also had subpoena power on behalf of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And what happens is the Appropriations Committee realizes that something's going on at Area 51. They're paying the bill and they don't know what's going on. And so they say, we're going to find out what's going on. We're going to find out what we're paying for here. If we're doing UFOs, we should know about this because we have oversight. So Greer continues. He said, I was told and was told that he had seen evidence that things were going on related to ET and the UFO subject. So D'Amato had picked up this sense that something was going on. But with that subpoena power, and the subpoena power that I heard he had was absolute. It doesn't matter what security clearance someone had signed, he could waive it. He could waive any security clearance on behalf of the Appropriations Committee. And with this power and with the top secret clearance on behalf of that committee, he wrote the checks for the U.S. government. He could not penetrate them. So he's trying to get to this group. He looked at me squarely in the eye because Greer said, you know, he was going after this group. So D'Amato looks him square in the eye and says, Mr. Greer, you're dealing with the varsity team of all black programs. Good luck. And basically says you're wasting your time. Now, what D'Amato had done was he'd gone to everybody. He went to Stanton Friedman. He went to Timothy Good, who was a major researcher at the time, who had worked on the Area 51 story. And he went to George Knapp. He went to John Lear. He went to Huff. He went to all the people, Bob Lazar, and he was trying to get into the Area 51 story. And he actually talks to the engineer that's in Annie Jacobson's book. This engineer that talks about the Roswell crash. He actually gets to him, and he races around. He gets all this, and one of the key people he talks to is Whitley Strieber. So Whitley Strieber connects D'Amato with Jacques Vallée. And you start to see Dick D'Amato talking behind the scenes as to what's going on. Now, nothing has changed with Dick D'Amato. Today, he's still as angry as he was at the time. And the reason that D'Amato had talked to Strieber was he was going after the Majestic 12 thing. Now, you see in the Wilson meeting at the Pentagon, Wilson's assistant says to Will Miller as he's leaving the room, you know that MJ-12 thing you're talking about? We know it exists. We just don't have a clearance to know what they're doing. And so he's going after this MJ-12 thing because it was also talked about by John Lazar at Area 51. The idea that MJ-12 was running that program at Area 51, and Whitley Strieber's relative was General Exxon at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he claimed that there was an MJ-12, although he called them the Unholy 13. He was at Wright-Patterson. So D'Amato had gone to talk, I guess, to Whitley Strieber's relative, this general, and he was putting this all together, and that's where you get the story where he goes to Jesse Marcel Jr. at the sub-basement of the Capitol and says, this thing's for real, and he taps Whitley Strieber's book. And Whitley Strieber's book is about MJ-12 and Roswell, and he's saying it's all for real, and D'Amato said, this is real, this is not fiction. And that's when, Jesse said, well, when are you going to tell the people? And he said, well, if it were up to me, I would have done it yesterday, but it's not up to me. I'm just here to determine what the security for the program is costing. Now, what happens with D'Amato is he finds out, almost the same as Wilson found out. He found out who was running the show. He found out how they had walked around it. And then what did he do? He basically just joined the team. He did nothing. And that was 30 years ago. That's 1990. It was 30 years ago that he figured out what was going on. And he told Jesse Marcel Jr. that it was real, that these guys had unlimited money, and that they had all this program running, and that they were unelected. Exactly the same thing that Wilson found out, and then he just sort of disappeared. And the one researcher I know that has had some contact with him, he still won't talk, but he will talk about how angry he is, that the government is run by people who aren't elected, and that they've got this program running and stuff like that. But what did he do? Absolutely nothing. He knew, and like everybody else, he just turtled, and he went along with the plan, the same as Wilson, when he realized he might lose 1 or 2 stars and get demoted and not be promoted to the Defense Intelligence Agency head. He shut up too and walked away, so they can put pressure on people to keep them quiet. And D'Amato knew he was elected. He took his paycheck from the Senate Appropriations Committee and did nothing to stop it, even though he discovered what was going on. Now here's the conversations here with Jacques Vallée, where they set up this meeting with Jacques Vallée. And I always recommend people read Jacques Vallée's books, Forbidden Science, especially volume 3 and volume 4, because he basically outs everybody. He basically is just taking a journal of his time during the 1990s, and he mentions everybody, and he mentions exactly what's going on. And here he's talking about Colonel Blackburn, who was also on the John Alexander. He worked at Los Alamos, and he was an engineer for Lockheed, and he was on John Alexander's group in this Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group. But here, Jacques Vallée is talking about they were trying at that whole 85 effort. They were trying to do a scientific approach, get a small research team, and they were going to try to get funds. And Jacques Vallée sort of spelled out that he was going to get $150,000 for his own part of the research, although I was never consulted about what I would do. So that's what they were trying to do in 85 with this Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group. They had a budget, and they were trying to get money from the government, but they could never find anything that would actually prove that they could actually get anywhere, because they just couldn't get anything on anything. And therefore, they weren't able to go to the government and say, okay, here's the program, and we can figure this out. They basically just hit brick walls every time they turned around. And when I release these notes, you'll see that that was true. They couldn't discover anything. They knew that, like Bobby Rainman, there was the rumor that Bobby Rainman was running the engineering program for Beck Engineering, but that's all they had on the paper, just his name. It seemed like they couldn't really, they'd heard the rumors the same as everybody else, but they couldn't get to them. So Whitley Strieber sets up this meeting. He suggests that I meet with Senior Senator staffer Rich D'Amato, convinced that there was an illegal intelligence activity involving UFOs, but that, in D'Amato saying, the spooks will circle the wagons as soon as they notice outside pressure, just as the Nixon thugs did at the time of Watergate, and the Friends of Oliver North did at the time of the Iran-Contra scandal. And D'Amato has been on the Senate staff for 16 years. So they're basically saying this thing that once D'Amato gets going, then they're all going to sort of join ranks and fight this off. And they actually did fight it off. They were able to keep the program secret. This could be dangerous. Whitley told Vallée, D'Amato will only speak to you on condition of secrecy. So here you have this guy who's supposed to be working for the American taxpayer, and he's working on secrecy as well. He wants to speak on a condition of secrecy. He doesn't want to do anything with the ufologists. That's true as well. Dick D'Amato, if he hears you're a UFO researcher, he will not talk to you. They all think we're a bunch of nutcases. So he won't, but he was talking to Jacques Vallée. And then they mentioned this Robert Collins. Now, just last day, I gave sort of people advice to go talk to Bob Collins. He was the Condor. He wasn't the Falcon. He was the Condor and the Avery, and he's the guy that helped set up what was called the Avery for Bill Moore. So he's a guy that knows some of the stuff that's going on. So here's the meeting where they get together. D'Amato had actually read Confrontations. Told me he
need to read that paragraph.
What's that? Yeah, read the D'Amato who had read Confrontations.
All right. It says, D'Amato, who has read Confrontations, told me he was upset at the intelligence community. Quote, "These guys have been hiding their UFO data from the legislative branch for years. They behave as if they ran the country. They only come before us to get the appropriations for their secret projects, like their latest discoid platforms, although they're not authorized to fool the American public or to create hoaxes or UFO simulations using taxpayers' money as they do. I intend to find out what's been going on," end quote.
So they have this program which comes out, this discoid platform program, but you can see that he's figured it out. He knows what they're doing. He knows it's illegal. So keep going. And so that this is Valet asking him about what he's going to do about it.
"Are you thinking of new congressional hearings?" I asked him. Not in the sense ufologists talk about hearings, as if they were a panacea.
Panacea, yeah.
Panacea. It's this Midwest accent, sorry. You can't set up such a process to find out the truth. In this town, you must find out the truth first and then hold your hearings. You have to catch the fish before you go fishing. That's what we did with Watergate and Iran-Contra. In both cases, we dragged in super patriots who thought they were above the law. I told them about Jim Irish, the closest I ever came to finding a man who had been part of a large secret UFO data gathering operation. I had once taken Kit to meet him, but there was no follow-up.
So there he actually outs a guy by the name of Jim Irish. I've never heard the guy's name but Valet, who's a pretty high level guy, and Valet was actually a member of the Avery. He was the Hummingbird. It's actually in the book. He has the title chapter, sort of the Hummingbird. So he was known as the Hummingbird, but he outs this Jim Irish guy. And I guess a lot of researchers now will go and try to find out who this guy is. And you can see that they know what to do. They had a sense of how he was going to unravel this thing, how Dick D'Amato was going to go after this thing. But they were not surprised by anything. This was not some mysterious thing. Dick D'Amato knew what was going on. So here we have another meeting, and he talks about who's running the show. No.
That's a tiny one.
I guess, well, can you read that? Read this chapter or this paragraph here, because this is pretty interesting where he talks about, he outs another guy here, a CIA guy.
This says United flight to San Francisco, Friday, the 24th of May, 1991. Flying back from Washington, where I just met for 3 hours with Richard D'Amato at the Senate Appropriations Committee. When I told him about Kit's investigations, he agreed the three of us should get together before he did anything about Doty. Since our last discussion, he's met with Timothy Good, George Knapp, and Bob Lazar. He also mentioned Heinemann, former CIA officer and now an independent consultant who may have access to UFO data. What that stealthy group is doing is a felony, he pointed out. For a government employee to knowingly disseminate false information to the public is an offense that should send him to jail. The government can't spend appropriated money on projects that Congress doesn't know about. It's an even greater offense if they spend private money to do it. That raises the question, would the president be told the truth? Worse, it raises the question of who is running the country. If the men who sit in this chamber cannot find out about such a project, we are no longer in a democracy. Is a private contractor, a Battelle or a Lockheed, deciding the fate of the nation? Whatever that secret project, it must be controlled by an incredible level of fear because nobody dares talk about it. I find no leaks anywhere.
Okay, and you see the top lawyer in the Congress trying to dig down into this subject. and he's not fooled by anything, and yet basically there's no leaks. They seal the door, like they, as they say, they surround the wagons, and they basically cut them off. Kit Green has discussions on, we'll skip the first part of the remote viewing. They talk about remote viewing, and Kit Green used to run the remote viewing project. And they talk about this plane that was found by the remote viewers in Africa that Jimmy Carter said was the most amazing thing. But there's something at the end here I thought was significant here. They talk about Dale. Talk about
it's when he's talking about how you get on the inside.
Yeah.
It says, apparently you get invited to go into the desert near Sandina, New Mexico, and there you will see your first UFO, Kit answered. I recalled what he had told me about Bill Moore, but that UFO was a cheap special effects gadget from a Hollywood backlot. I heard in the MD in the Brotherhood passed away recently. Oh, there we go. Let me read that again. I heard the MD in the Brotherhood passed away recently. I was supposed to succeed him, Kit added. Somehow it didn't happen. You must not have passed the test, said D'Amato. How do you think the information works? You better ask Jacques, said Kit. He's the expert on that. We spent the next half hour discussing control systems, and my observation that the information arrow always seemed to be directed inward like a retrovirus, not outward. In summary, the secret project is illegal. It isn't within a government agency. It is small. It generates high-level leaks designed to infect the research community with false data, and the cover makes it look bigger than it really is. Not bad for one meeting.
Yeah. And so the OSI was running this counterintelligence stuff where they were, sort of getting people sort of all thrown off the track. Mm-hmm. And you can see that they sort of knew this whole thing. Then they mentioned Pandolfi getting involved, and Dale Graff, who ran the remote viewing for Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Let's go on to the next section here. It's hidden away in a contractor's basement somewhere, not in the government. And all the brothers, come to think of it, are in their 70s, older gentlemen. So they're talking about this thing where that's where I say it's more a thing where it's like a club or like a secret society thing where Kid is going to be brought in when some guy dies and stuff like that. And it's sort of like who can trust who. It's something that really didn't sort of surprise any of these guys. Now, here's another meeting with Valet and D'Amato, the Belgian wave. So D'Amato says in this thing that he believed the Belgian thing was man-made stuff. And
do you want me to read that paragraph? It says, Dick is convinced those are human and the project that makes them illegal. No money was ever appropriated for it. Intelligence groups like the AFOSI continue to cover, distort, destroy data, and generally make it impossible for Congress to find out what's going on. I told him I could understand how a rogue group could keep the lid on data in the US, but what about other nations?
There. So basically we've gone through all the stuff and this is just in Jacques Vallée's book, talking about Dick D'Amato. And Stephen Greer talks about him as well, that he had gotten to the bottom of this thing. So I just wanted to add that to this discussion about this Wilson leak document, because they're talking about how this thing almost unraveled. And it did almost unravel. Like he was at Area 51. I don't know if he got on the base or not, but he was convinced and is still very angry today. That the fact that they've been able to get away with this and said there's this dark agents, a group that has unlimited money and power, and they're not elected, and has been very upset about it for 30 years. Now, in these discussions, we were talking about Kit Green, and Kit Green was a guy who's been working with Hal Puthoff since the early 1970s, top secret clearance, ran the weird desk of the CIA. And at the end of the document, they basically talk about the fact a lot of people think it's controversial where they say there are no abductions. And you will note that Stephen Greer also said there was no abductions. And it's a very controversial thing. And when I saw it, when I heard that, I said the same thing. That doesn't make any sense. And yet I know it comes from these very high level people. And it's like, what do they mean? There must be something like there's an event that takes place, but it may not be what we think it is. It may not be as physical as we think it is, because I'm writing a book called Extraterrestrial or Maybe Not, where I start looking at that thing where you see connections between abduction experiences and stuff in the spirit world. I mean, absolutely direct connections. Like, if you can't tell one from the other, so it starts wondering what's actually going on. And the reason I put this one piece in here, this comes off a board, 2007. And this is Kit Green talking. And so Kit Green, in 2002, that document came out. They would have had access Kit Green would have had access to the report that Eric Davis put out, and he would have seen that thing about this high-level guy. Wilson couldn't get the briefing, but this other high-level guy got a briefing, and he said, we're doing the back-end engineering stuff, and we're not getting anywhere with it, and there are no abductions. And so 5 years later, Kit Green writes this on a board. And so I want to read that because he basically says exactly the same thing, which again indicates there's something there that you should look at. Some people are saying, oh, this is disinformation. They stuck in the no abduction stuff for disinformation. No, there are a bunch of high-level people who are saying this, and we got to figure out what are they talking about? What do they mean by that? So here's what Kit Green says. And this is what's called the core story. So Kit Green, Jacques Vallée, and Hal Puthoff got together at Denny's restaurant in the 80s, and they wanted to say there's a lot of garbage stories going on, UFOs or memes, and what's the deal? Like, what do we know for sure? And they came to the conclusion it was called the core story. So here's the core story. It happened. Like, we've been visited once or twice. No abductions ever. So he says exactly the same thing that's in the Wilson document. No abductions ever. Serpo is a hoax. I was slow in figuring that one out. Shame on me. And I remember hearing Eric Davis talk about Hal Puthoff was reading the Serpo stuff, and he said, I can't believe he's reading. Like, why is he reading this stuff? And so a lot of them, and it was probably because there was classified material in the Serpo documents that was being put out, and they realized there's this classified stuff, and they're trying to figure out who's doing what, why are they putting this stuff out. So everybody was reading this stuff, and Kit Green was interested, and then he says here, Serpo's a hoax. I was slow in figuring it out. Not that it's, no, it isn't anybody's business who told me, or the millions of hours of work that leads to this fragile, subjective, and personal and unsupportable conclusion based upon inductive, not deductive logic. I won't give any private data. Okay, he says, I know zero anymore. That is any longer classified. So he's saying that in terms of the UFO stuff, he did have classification because he ran the weird desk from about 1970, 69, 70. He took it over from a guy by the name of Arthur Lundahl. Arthur Lundahl ran the weird desk. He was the guy who briefed President Kennedy on the Cuban Missile Crisis. He had started a lab called the National Photographic Interpretation Center, where they analyzed all the U-2, all the SR-71, the satellite photographs. He was fascinated in UFOs, and it was doing analysis for the Blue Book. When they did the Robertson panel report in the 1950s, Arthur Lundahl was looking at the UFO photographs and doing the analysis in Navy lab, and they allowed him to start the CIA lab, where they looked at the U-2 photographs. So he goes into Kennedy to brief him on the Cuban Missile Crisis with the photograph part. and shows him this is a launcher, this is a missile in Cuba and stuff like that. But he also briefs the president on UFOs. And then Kit Green takes over in, I think, about 1969, 70, 71, somewhere in there. And he runs the weird desk at the CIA till 1983 when Ron Pandolfi takes over. And of course, during that period of time, he would have clearance and he would know sort of what's going on. But he's saying in this night, 2007, I don't know anything anymore that's classified. He said, I believe a reverse engineering program has been going on for decades. Exactly what Eric Davis says. It has been singularly unsuccessful. Exactly what Eric Davis says. Eric Davis said they shut it down in 1989. George Knapp says, I think I haven't heard him say it, but I heard he said that they sort of take it off the shelf every 7 or 8 years, take a look at it, put it back on the shelf, because they basically can't figure it. They've got an intact craft, which is the rumor. They have an intact craft, but they really can't make it work. It was moved to the private sector in the 1970s and 1980s. I think that's been generally believed for a long time that once they shut down Blue Book, they didn't need the answers anymore. They had what they needed, and they didn't need to collect sightings anymore. So they shut Blue Book down and said, you know, there are new UFOs, and they moved it into the contractor world and started working on the technology because they no longer needed to investigate UFO sightings. Now they needed they had hardware, and now the plan was to try to figure out how this stuff worked. And this is kind of interesting because I think this is part of what the people say, why are they covering it up? And you start referring to Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is quite clueless. So the thing is, and I maintain this, people think they've got all this technology, they've got it all figured out, and it may simply be that they know UFOs exist, they've got these films and stuff, but they can't figure it out. I mean, if they can't back engineering anything, and they really don't know whether these things are extraterrestrial, or they even know they got bodies. Are these bodies extraterrestrial, interdimensional? Where are they coming from? They really don't have the answers, and that's what I sort of believe. And part of that belief is based on people like Kit Green, who's been around for a long time and knows what's going on, when he says Uncle Sam is quite clueless. And then he says some guys in the intelligence community are playing bad games. And that's referencing stuff like Benowitz and Richard Doty and stuff. They're putting in the stories about the underground bases and stuff. So he says some guys in the intelligence community are playing bad games, mostly because they are clueless and know they are and want to figure out how to find out and get inside. So he's basically saying there's these intelligence people who are putting out all sorts of counterintelligence, disinformation stuff, and mixing the whole story up. And that's why they sat down, the three guys, Green, Putoff, and Valet, in the 1980s and said, what do we know for sure? And we got all this garbage, all these stories floating around. It ain't inside, never have been. People believe otherwise are understandably paranoid, and I understand. So he's basically saying, you know, he was not inside. He did mention the fact that he was getting, people sending him alien autopsies, videos and stuff, and that he believed that they were even trying to throw him off. And he was sort of like the head CIA guy. And that would make sense that you have these people inside the intelligence where people are fighting for money and power, and they're trying to throw each other off. And so he believed that the people who had it were trying to throw him off. Now, this thing I put in here, and this goes to an interesting thing. To the guy who I believed, there's two guys I believe who actually put there's discussion about where how it actually got to Richard Dolan and stuff. And it was true that at the very end, James Rigney had sent it. I believe he sent it to Dolan. I believe he sent it to James Fox. But by then it was on the internet, because it was on the internet. And there's two guys that I believe that put it on. I haven't really spoken to either of them since. They were talking to me about a totally different issue. They were going to get brought into some of the programs. I won't say which programs, but he was basically asking me, what about this guy? What about this guy? They're offering me this job. What should I do and stuff? And I was basically saying what I knew about these people and these groups and stuff like that. And then he said he had a friend who was in the Pentagon who didn't believe in UFOs, but he was a childhood friend, and that he was sort of bouncing some stuff off him. So what happens is there was a Mellon leak. Chris Mellon has all this stuff on his website. Twitter Jay in Great Britain picks all this stuff off, and they put it out. So what happens is I realize that I can't really put the document out myself, but I'm not going to withhold it from people. So this particular guy said to me, he said, you know, I told him about the document. He said, well, let me see it. And then he said, why don't you drop it? And I said, well, I explained why I wasn't going to do it. And then he said, well, leave it with me. And he said, oh, my friend in the Pentagon says just put it on Reddit. And then I said, oh, okay. And then he didn't say anything. He didn't say he was going to do it or whatever. And then it went for maybe a month or whatever. And then suddenly he phones me from Chicago and he says, oh, you know that document? He's in an elevator in Chicago. And he said, you know that document? I think it just went on the internet. And then what happened is I got it, and this you'll see this in UFO Joe's report, that it went and it sat for a long time. It sat on the internet for a long time, and nobody picked it up. And so James Rigney contacted me back, and he said, well, what's going on? I said, well, I did my part. It's on the internet, and I don't intend to do anything. I think you should start sending it to people because nobody knows who you are. You're not connected to these people. You can just drop the document. Nobody's going to care. And so it sat there for quite a while, and then I got the phone call. It was picked up by the Young Guns, and that's where UFO Joe is one of them. And he describes in his study where they picked it up and they phoned me. James Ian Dolly phoned me, and he said, you know that document? Because I talked to him in December of 2018. That was the month after I got it. I was telling him that I had it. And I told a lot of people I had it. I told Jimmy Church. I told Dave Scott. I told John Greenwald. I was on his show. I told him that I had it. I didn't say what it was, but I said I got this major thing that I've come across. And so what happens is that the document sits on the internet. Nobody does anything. The Young Guns pick it up, and Danny Silva has it. And so they contact me, and I said, well, Danny's got it. Danny can drop it, and he'll be famous forever, but nobody's going to talk to him. And that's this whole idea about the secret society, the secret handshake stuff, where once you expose your people, you can, you make your move and write your article or do whatever. You upset the people who told you the stuff, and nobody talks to you anymore. So I said to Danny Silva, you can drop it. But I knew that he was dealing with Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff, and he was trying to get these people all to talk. And I said, if you drop it on these guys, they ain't talking to you anymore. And so they held it as well. They sat on it as well. And then I'm not sure. They said Richard Dolan sat on it for a while too, but I'm not sure about that. But I'll always give Richard credit because he put his reputation on the line. And what's critically important that people got to realize, the reason Richard went with it and was so certain about it is because he had been shown 2 pages of the document in 2008. So he had seen the document before, and he'd actually described it in December of 2018. 5 months before he went public with it. He had not even seen the full document. He was talking about it on the Jimmy Church show on this 2 pages that he'd seen. So that was before he'd seen the document, and that's why he was so confident. So what happens is there's this leak at the on Mellon's website, which I think was not quite a leak. There was a bunch of stuff, and I believe it was all altered. I believe that all that stuff that was on there had changes made to it, all the documents. I don't believe they're the actual documents. They are the material in the documents, but I believe those documents have been altered, like the Elizondo letter, which is written to the Secretary of Defense. It should have been written to his boss. It doesn't have a date on it. It's got a bunch of spelling mistakes and stuff like that. So they put this stuff out, and one of the things they put out is the photograph of the DVDs, and these are the DVDs of the films, the Nimitz, and all those videos, and that's part of it. And then there's this mailing envelope, and basically, so I'm talking to this guy about the documents, whatever, and I'm talking about the Mellon leak and stuff, and I basically say to him, you got this guy in the Pentagon. I mean, can you find out who this Essex is? And he says, yeah, okay, I'll ask him. And again, this guy's not a UFO guy or whatever. And then I'm talking to him. He would phone me every morning about 8:30 in the morning, whatever. We're talking on a cell phone, and all of a sudden he says, hang on, I got a message coming in here. Oh, he says, we got a direct hit. Her name is Rhonda Essex. She's in public affairs, and he said if this was going to be leaked out of the Pentagon, that's exactly who would go through. It'd go through public affairs, and this Rhonda Essex, she was the only one with that thing, and so that's what it went from Rhonda Essex to Leo Elizondo to Mellon, and Mellon went to the New York Times.
Yes, and you brought up James Fox a few minutes ago, and I've previewed his new film coming out, The Phenomenon, and he has clips of that envelope you just showed and Christopher Mellon testimony going along with it as well. So that'll be an exciting snippet for people to see.
Yeah,
when it gets released.
Yeah, and it shows what I maintain is that it was an approved operation. They just got to make it look like it was some sort of leak or whatever, but it's an approved operation. It came through because the public affairs where Rhonda Essex works is the same place where everybody's going to get information on the Nimitz story. They're making the denials and the confirmations and stuff like that. And it's the same place where Colonel Coleman operated out of during the 1970s when they did the UFO cover, not the UFO cover live, the UFOs Past, Present, and Future by Bob Emeneger, that big documentary that he said he went into the Pentagon and signed a contract, and they were told to do this documentary on UFOs for the Pentagon, and that was all run through public affairs as well. In fact, Bob tells the story, they go into public affairs, and these guys are all upset, like, what are you doing? I mean, you bring up this UFO thing on your documentary, and our phone comes off the hook. And Alan Sandler, who was one of the producers, said, what do you mean? You guys invited us here. Like, what are you talking about? And then they said they shut up. But they basically said, you know, that you could be arrested and you got to follow security and stuff like that. And they put this documentary out. And that's why I believe they've been doing that all along. They've been coming through public affairs, and they've got to hide it. They've got to have plasma liability. And this is just,
that's what people say now. It's like, why aren't heads rolling? If this was so secret and somebody's leaking it, who's in trouble? Well, it's because they could leak it and did, and that's why nobody's in trouble.
Yeah, and because they got approval to do it, and that's what I say they're doing. Like, this is the second document. This is the one that was the Young Guns sort of took all the stuff out of here, but this is the one where they exposed the girl. There's a female pilot. Nobody knew there was a female pilot in the Nimitz thing, and they exposed her. And some people still believe this is a legitimate document. I say, come on, it's totally altered. And what they have is they go through all these different. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they got the 4 pilots, and the one is the girl. And the girl, what they have, if you see the what's under the black marks, they have her phone number, they have her email address, they have her name, they have her birth date, they have everything you could possibly want. And then they have Fravor, for example, like one of the other pilots. They got Fravor. Oh, he's about 40 years old, may live in Massachusetts. It's like they have no details on these other guys. It's like they're guessing at their ages and stuff. It's like, come on already. It's like they might as well have given them a free cell phone to make the phone call to this woman. They wanted out this woman. So they changed the document. It's not a legitimate document because they altered all this stuff. They took all the details, the personal details out for the 3 pilots, and they put in the 1 pilot's details because they want you to phone her. And that's what they did. They phoned her, and now she's sort of come public. But that's what they do. They put this document, and I absolutely maintain that it's not a legitimate document. It's the document, but it's been altered to make it, because if you alter the document, then when you put it out, you can say very confidently the thing's a hoax. We did not put that document. Document's a hoax. It's not a real document, and it's true, but it gives you the information.
And Grant, you brought it up a few minutes ago, since we're talking about discrepancies in these documents, like typos or being dated wrong or dates left out. We do believe that this type of thing is done to documents as a way to follow who has what information.
That's
right. To kind of sneak it, to see who's connected in what rabbit hole in another way. So if somebody talks about, oh, well, it's the date, and they know that that document has the date wrong and follow that line, then they kind of see who's playing in the field with the leaked information, who knows what, who's on the right track, who's whatever. I mean, you know, these are kind of like sneaky boyfriend-girlfriend moves. You start playing all these little backstories and trying to find out snippets here and there. And, you know, and it's just information games.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
we
what I
all
call
know
it.
how to play both.
That's what I call
Very
it.
well.
I call it like managing magic, where you basically have all the people. So instead of killing all the researchers, you try to manage them. So you want to know who's doing what. And that's true. I've even heard this story where it's like maybe just a period or something that's changed on a document. It's like very small changes where they can actually see who's leaking it and where you're, because if you're doing security, apparently it costs more for security than it does for the program. So you want to find out who's leaking the stuff. And that's why I maintain, I was even talking to the young guns tonight, and they asked that question. I said, I think the two reasons is, number one, that you want to control the document as to where the document's moving around, and you want to be able to deny the document's real. You put the information out, almost like the Bob Lazar thing. You put it out, you know it's all going to fall apart. You know Bob Lazar is going to blow up in everybody's face, that he's not the guy he's claiming he's going to be. You show him the actual stuff, you take him on the base, and then when he comes out, the story falls apart and everybody runs for cover, and the story gets out, but nobody believes it. So you're playing both these games in that, but yet I don't believe it's the government. I don't believe it's the official government. I believe it's agencies inside the government. So there's people who want it out and people who don't want it out. And
well, and that's what I was just kind of gonna say concerning the pilots that you just mentioned. And I'll admit, I have not dug into all of these pilots' testimony. I've heard some of them talk on shows and things, but what I have heard people talk about is this amazing lady pilot. She's the least strong witness. And I wonder, in like situations like we just talked about, here's all her information, nobody else's information. So were they trying to like feed maybe lesser information so people would think it's a dead end, or just, you know, be able to debunk things based on her perspective as opposed to the other witnesses? So, I mean, there are games like that played. Why would you only release one person's info when you obviously have everybody's info?
And I think that is sort of a warning to people, that people think they can play the document game with the government. And like I mentioned, like they talk about the MJ-12, the whole thing, that in the 1990s, they released 3,700 pages of MJ-12 documents. So everybody said, well, it's Richard Doty did the MJ-12 document. That's total nonsense. There's no way Richard Doty can do 3,700 pages. That's an agency doing. That's somebody doing something, and they're doing it for a very specific reason. And if you think you can play the document game against them and get documents, and I said to the young guns tonight, I said, I don't believe there's really any legitimate documents. I think they've got all the documents sealed off. The difference between the Wilson document and the alien autopsy document is they're not official government documents. So the reason they leaked is because they're private documents that were in Edgar Mitchell's files. But I'm very, very hesitant to say that there's any UFO documents that have leaked. If you can even go back to 1948 when Truman brings in the air advisor to do UFO briefings. He brings the guy in and he says to him, I need an oral briefing every 3 months. So in 1948 they were doing it orally. They know how to cover this thing up, and you can see the Canadian said it was the most highly classified subject. Wilson saying he couldn't get to the bottom of it. D'Amato couldn't get to the bottom of it. So they have it pretty well sealed up. And so anybody thinks that there's a document that is leaked out of this very secret program, I don't think so. So we'll leave it at that tonight. And Will can sign off for us. Will, come and sign off. What do you got to say?
Are you going to say it? He says, hit like and subscribe.
Nope.
Hit like it.
Nope.
Nope. He says, nope, delete it.
Okay.
He says, take 3. Thank you, Grant.
Take 3, delete it as well.